Okay, so dear participants, as this is a Zoom webinar, please note that all video and audio are automatically off. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box and the moderator will address them during the Q&A session. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good day to everyone. Thank you for joining us in this International Day of Forest. Yang berbahagia, Academician Emeritus Prof. Tan Sri Dr. Mazlan Osman, the co-chair of the International Conference on Tropical Sciences, or TropSc2024, Senior Fellows of Academy, member of Young Scientist Network, Academy of Sciences Malaysia, partners and affiliates, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our 11th pre-conference webinar, part of the Future Belongs to the Tropics webinar series. This webinar series celebrates the tropics and highlights the importance of science and technology in the region. Additionally, it serves as a lead-up to the International Conference on Tropical Science, which the Tropical Science Foundation and Academy of Sciences Malaysia will jointly host in October 2024. Today's webinar is a joint effort between Tropical Science Foundation and the Academy of Science Malaysia, where we are celebrating International Day of Forest, theme Forest and Innovation, New Solutions for a Better World, focusing on forest issues of the tropics. So before we begin, please welcome Academician Emeritus Prof. Tan Sri Dr. Mazlan Osman, the co-chair of our upcoming International Conference on Tropical Sciences, TropSc2024, to give her a welcoming speech.
Hi, thank you, Amira. Hi, everyone. A very, very warm welcome to the International Day of Forest webinar. I know we are all very busy, so thank you for being with us today, because we are exploring the theme of forests and innovation, new solutions for a better world. And we're going to have a special focus, of course, on the tropics. So today we unite to celebrate the invaluable contribution of forests to our planet's health, prosperity, and well-being. As we navigate the complex changes of climate change, and they're getting worse, biodiversity loss also getting worse, and sustainable development, the significance of forests as pillars of resilience and innovation cannot be overstated. The theme, Forests and Innovation, invite us to explore novel approaches, technologies, partnerships that can help address the complex issues facing tropical forests. Today, we will delve into groundbreaking research, successful case studies, and visionary initiatives that showcase the transformative power of innovation in forest conservation, restoration, and governance. So we will be very, I'm so excited to hear from the experts we're going to have today. We will hear from the moderator will introduce them to you in a minute. Oh, by the way, so sorry for the delay in this start. We had a technical glitch, so I'm so sorry. We hope you'll continue to be patient with us. So I encourage you all to actively engage in discussions. You know, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see questions, you'll see comments. Do whatever you need to do, raise your hand if necessary, because we've got to leverage the platform that we have today to foster collaboration, also catalyze positive change for the benefit of forests and all of us who depend on them. We always think that only a few people depend on forests. That's not true. So once again, I thank every one of you for your participation and commitment to advancing the cause of forest conservation and sustainable development. So enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tan Sri Mazlan, for the speech. Ladies and gentlemen, before I pass the floor to our moderator, Associate Professor Dr. Norizah Kamarudin, to take over, please allow me to introduce her. So, Associate Professor Dr. Norizah Kamarudin received her Bachelor in Forestry from Universiti Malaysia in 2006 and a PhD in Forest Engineering from UPM in 2012. She is an Associate Professor in the Department of Forestry Science and Biodiversity and a research affiliate with the Institute of Tropical Forestry and Forest Product, or INTROP, of Universiti Malaysia. So, her current research interests include forest operation, mangrove, and geographic information systems and remote sensing application in natural resources. So without further ado, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Norizah Kamarudin to moderate this session. Please welcome.
Thank you, Amira, for the introduction. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished guests, fellow forest enthusiasts from around the world, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and good day. So welcome to the International Day of Forest webinar, an event dedicated to discussing the critical issues in the tropical forest solution for a sustainable world with a particular focus on the challenges and opportunities presented by unique conditions in the tropical regions. So I am Norizah Kamarudin, honored to be your moderator for today's session. So to set the stage, let's briefly look into the International Day of Forest theme, which this year theme is Forest and Innovation, New Solutions for a Better World. Today, we gather in this webinar to explore the profound connection between forests and the issues, delving into the crucial role of this majestic landscape play in sustaining life and fostering biodiversity. It is my hope that our discussion today will inspire collective action for the conservation and preservation of our vital forest ecosystem. So addressing the myriad challenges facing tropical forests requires a multi-phase approach that leverage innovation across various areas, from advanced monitoring technologies to sustainable management practice and community empowerment. Innovative solutions offer promising avenues for mitigating deforestation, conserving biodiversity, and promoting sustainable development. By harnessing innovation and fostering collaboration among stakeholders, I believe a participant today in this webinar comes from diverse agencies and roles. Then today we can strive toward a future where tropical forests thrive, supporting our well-being and the planet. Okay. Our webinar today will be divided into several segments to ensure a comprehensive discussion of our theme today. So we will begin with our three panelists sharing their insights into the forest, and perhaps they will highlight the issue in the tropics and how to counter the issue with innovations for a better forest, better world. Following that, we will have an interactive Q&A session. Okay, before we dive into our discussion, let's take a moment to go over the format and some guidelines for this webinar. For the Q&A session afterward, we would like to encourage your active participation. Okay, feel free to type your question in the Q&A box or chat box at any time, and we will do our best to address them during the Q&A session. In addition, participants may use the chat box to interact with fellow participants. So this is a wonderful opportunity to connect with like-minded individuals who are passionate about forests. Today, we are privileged to have three distinguished experts, each contributing unique insights to our discussion. So our speakers, Prof. Lawrence, Dr. Lee Soon Leong, and also Dr. Mahmud Ibrahim Mahmud. The first speakers today will be Dr. Lee Soon Leong. Let's me introduce short about Dr. Lee. Okay, Dr. Lee obtained his PhD in plant genetics from Universiti Malaysia in 1998. He joined Forest Research Institute Malaysia FRIM in 1995 and currently Director of Forest Biodiversity Division FRIM. He leads a multidisciplinary research team addressing research topics related to conservation, management, and sustainable utilization of forest resources. Currently, he has authored or co-authored around 170 scientific publications. So Dr. Lee will talk about balancing conservation and utilization of tropical forest biodiversity. Now, without further ado, I will pass the floor to our speaker, Dr. Lee Soon Leong. Dr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Norizah. So let me share the slide first.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Norizah. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all the participants. So today, I would like to share topics, balancing conservation and utilization of tropical forest biodiversity. So okay, tally with the theme of this year, the what they call that, the theme of this the International Day of Forest 2024. Today I would like to share I think two efforts, or I can say also I think the innovation that can be used to balance between conservation and utilization of forest resources. So the first one actually is some these innovation, how are we going to come up with conservation and management guidelines. Okay, the second part is some innovation. How are we going to assess, the problem of this illegal logging in the forest? So I'll go, I think, first part on these are the efforts on conservation and management guidelines. So these are some of the background of this innovation. Tropical forests are rich in plant species diversity. So we all know that in tropical forests is a rich of plant species diversity. For example, an area of 50 hectares in Paso Forest Reserve, one of the forest reserves in Pennsylvania, were reported to contain more than 800 different tree species. So, however, for the majority of these species, it is unlikely that we have enough resources and time to obtain, adequate knowledge for conservation and management. So, what is the solution? We have so rich of these plant species diversity. Then we are, in terms of resource, it's impossible actually we can generate enough knowledge, to come up with some these conservation guidelines. So it suggested that for conservation of forest plant species, we might want to group the species according to life history traits. So that the information generated for a species can be adapted to species that have a similar type of life history traits. So I'll go further on this one. Accordingly, in order to conserve forestry resources in Malaysia, so we have generated genetics plus ecological information for various type of plant species with the different type of life history traits. So life history trait actually we are focusing actually is the major one would be whether they are rare or widely distributed. Another these I think traits that we are emphasis actually is whether they are outcrossing or selfing or apomictic type of reproduction. So we have generated all these information for various plant species with different type of these life history traits. So here I think I've got widespread one. So I think I will not our study actually focused mainly on all these tetracarp species. You can see Shorea lepusula, this Rubosolea lepusula, and also I think Gonostylus, some of these the Rubosolea platycadus. So the techniques actually involve for ecological study, we conduct a population survey. After that, then we set up the ecological plot, for monitoring ecological study. Also, I think another part is that we are interested or we need to carry out is on these are the reproductive biology and the phenology of the species. So beside ecology, also I think some of the techniques that been used, I think, to generate this information is on DNA, DNA extraction. Then we develop marker. Then we conduct the genotyping, the microsatellite, or DNA sequencing, and with various type of analysis. After we come up with the genetic structure, phylogeographical and evolutionary history, and the most important one actually, we are trying to get the magic number. In terms when you talk about conservation, what is the optimum size, population size for conservation? Also, I think what is like effective breeding units. Effective breeding, that means you need to conserve how many these adult trees in order to prevent, the inbreeding, inbreeding. So all these, we are trying to come up with all these magic number. So once we have all this information, then when you talk about conservation and management guideline, basically it can be divided to in situ conservation guideline, prime material transfer guideline, and also germplasm collection guideline. So for example, in situ conservation guideline of this Aquilina americansis, maybe I think some of you, I think, familiar with this species. This is a species that produce agarwood. Agarwood that with a very high price. So we gather the information, ecological and genetic information, then you'll be able to come up with a guideline in situ. For example, in Peninsular Malaysia, for the in situ conservation guideline, basically we have to divide the Peninsular Malaysia into three important genetic regions. So in each of these regions, then we need to conserve at least 5 populations. 5 populations. Then in each of these population, the size should be more than 200 hectares. Then consisting of these 390 trees more than 5 cm DBH to maintain maximum level of genetic diversity or withstand loss of due to drift. And also, must consist at least 65 these trees more than 20 cm. This is the minimum number of reproductive individuals to prevent inbreeding. So out of this one, then we can set up a buffer zone that will protect the core from age effect. And also, outer than this, the buffer zone is a transition zone that will be available for sustainable utilization. So this is how actually we translate actually the findings from the research into the in situ conservation guideline. So besides that, also I think one of the important guideline is a prime material transfer guideline. Especially I think when you talk about we want to reintroduction, to the natural habitat, or even though I think for some planting for forest plantation. And also I think for these Aquilina americansis, also we need to, I think, start also to collect the germplasm from the wild. This one basically I think towards ex situ conservation. So basically I think this is the guideline we come out. For this germplasm collection guideline, it has been, I think, implemented. So this one now you can find, I think, in 2 actually location. One I think is in what they call that in this region, and another one is in this region. Then I think another one I think ongoing. So now, how are you going to use a life history approach, actually to guide, us, for this conservation? So we compile all this one, all the information that we generated. That means scientific information, either genetic or ecological information, for all the species that we have already studied. So this is a summary. Basically, you can see in terms of genetic diversity, those widespread species and with predominant outcrossing, they have a high level of genetic diversity, but low genetic structure. So, but if for rare and predominant selfing, normally the level of genetic diversity is high with the moderate type of genetic structure. And for extremely rare and apomictic, they have a low genetic diversity, but high genetic structure. So the basic number. So it can be ranged from 100 individual to 668 individual. This is the optimum population size in terms of this, what they call the number of individual, or from 8 hectares to approximately 267 hectares. So if you refer to the effective breeding unit, it can be ranging from 52 adult trees to 224 adult trees. So how are you going to use all these life history approach? For example, now we have one species that without any information. For example, Palakem bengali. Then we know their life history trait actually is that they are widespread, they're semi-gregarious and predominant outcrossing. By using this table, now we can, I think, predict that actually in terms of genetic diversity, they are high. In terms of genetic structure, they are low. Then in terms of optimum population size, which if we want to conserve these species in the wild, we need to have at least more than 200 hectares. Then in this more than 200 hectares should consist, more than 100 these adult trees in order to prevent, inbreeding. So I hope you can see that how actually we can use, this approach, the life history to predict those unknown, those species that we do not have all the information. So when we compile everything now, basically the life history for rare and predominant outcrossing species, the optimum population should be more than 100 hectares. Then in terms of this effective breeding unit is 60 mature tree. So similarly, I think to this the widespread, the hectareage would be larger, should be more than this. I think still very crude. Generally, I think is very quite preliminary. Then we can use as a guide, when you talk about the optimum population size or the effective breeding units. So you can see that from this type of approach, this innovation, the information generated for a species can be adapted to a species that have a similar type of life history traits. So this is the first, I think, the efforts that actually it's a still ongoing process. This we are still continue to generate all these the information on the other these species. For example, now we are doing something on the dipterocarpus cornutus, some other these important these tree species with very these different type of life history traits. So okay, for detail, then you can refer to the list of all these publications from our team, various type of publication on phylogeographical, genetic diversity, and also I think we also try to fill out the gap. Always I think we got a conservation research. You've got a finding. How are you going to translate it into a conservation management? They fill out the gap. So okay, this is the first part. The second part, I think the efforts, actually we are trying to come up with some tools that can be used, actually to assist, to overcome the problem of this the illegal logging. So some of the background, illegal harvesting of forest poses a significant threat to the sustainability of forest ecosystem. So how are you going to identify plant species, the geographical origin or the original stump? So basically, I think in terms of plant species identification, we have to rely on the morphology characters like the leaf, the flowers, the fruits. Then only that is basically, I think it's a taxonomy. You need the botanists or taxonomies in order to identify the species. But you can just imagine if, let's say, a tree, that means the wood have been converted to some timber. Then we have lost all these the morphological characters for species ID. Like for example, already changed to plywood, flooring, or door. How are we going to ID the species, even though and also the geographical origin, and also where is the original stump? In order to do that, currently I think they have three these methods. Whether it's a visual identification using wood anatomy, or another one, I think, is a chemical method using all these, mass spectrophotometer, the stable isotope, and the radiocarbon or near-infrared spectroscopy. Last but not least is the genetics method, using this, the field of this DNA barcoding, population genetic, phylogeography, and DNA profiling. So today, I think I would like to share about how actually we are using, this genetics method to identify plant species, geographical origin, and also track back to their original stump, to assist the problem if they say got a problem of illegal logging. So basically, I think for the genetic methods, when they say illegal logging taking place, if they say the first, I think photo show that is the lumber, the log. So the first thing I think we need to trace is for the tracking, we need to know the species. Whether these, Merantis, or some of the Ruboshuria, or these Merbau or the Insia palamanica. After we know the species, then the next question, is it possible that how are you going to track back into their original geographical origin? For example, in Peninsular Malaysia, whether actually it's from Kedah, is it from Pahang or Selangor, and from which forest reserve, these are geographical origin. So, and then last but not least, once we know the forest reserve or the geographical origin, how are you going to track the illegal log into their original stump? So in order, I think, to solve this problem, I think fields of DNA barcoding for species identification, the field of phylogeography to track back into their geographical origin, and also I think for the original stump using the DNA profiling technology. DNA. This one I think we're moving toward the forensic DNA forensic. So accordingly, I think since 15 years ago, we start, I think, to build out the system. The first one, I think, is for species identification using this DNA barcoding technology. So at the moment, I think for Malaysia, we already have the reference DNA barcode for approximately 700 these important timber species in Malaysia. This one can be ranging from diptocarps, non-dips, and various type of these timber species that can be found in these Malaysia. Then beside that, also for DNA profiling geographical origin, so by using this Diobaranocarpus helmii as an example, 15 years ago, then it spent 3 years, we have successfully developed a DNA-based timber tracking system for an important timber species in Malaysia. That is Diobaranocarpus helmii. So inside this system, you involve actually phylogeographical type of study, DNA profiling, and also I think in terms of this the forensic, especially I think when you're reaching about these what they call the statistical analysis, all these forensic parameters. So these are the publication that we published, I think 15 years ago, based on this one as a model species we start with. Then subsequently, with this, then we start to develop for other species. So at the moment for Malaysia, we have already developed for 13 important timber species. 13 important species. You can see the list here. I think I'm listed only the 10. Still another 3. I think recently we developed using 398 populations and more than 12,000 samples in Malaysia in order to build out these what they call it the DNA profiling databases for these 13 important timber species. So the species, I think, from Chengal, Diobaranocarpus helmii, from these some of these Merantis, the Shuria, Compassia, Gonostylus is a ramin, Aquilaria malacensis, as I mentioned, is the species that produce agarwood, and also the Rhizophora, those species that can be found in the mangrove forest. So the recently, I think, developed 3 species is Drybaranops aromatica, we call it Capo, and Drybaranops oblongifolia, the Keladan, and the last but not least is Diptocarpus cornutus, Kruing Gombang, Kruing. So these are all the publications that we already, I think, published for all these the DNA profiling databases we have developed. So now we have a various of these DNA information. We got all these DNA barcodes, sequences. Then we have all these the DNA profile for more than 10,000 individuals. How are you going to actually manage these the DNA database? So in order to do that, I think for Malaysia we have already come out actually with a DNA database management system. Then inside this DNA database management system consists of these 4 modules: My DNA, My Marker, My Barcode, and My Track. So the My DNA basically is the DNA bank information. The My Marker actually is a various type of marker that we use for this purpose. Then also My Barcode is just a reference DNA barcodes for species ID. The My Track actually is for forensic applications. So beside that also, when you move towards these forensic, normally I think illegal logging exists. Normally I think the evidence will be tendered in the court. then is a forensic. Then we need to come up with a very rigid type of standard operating procedure. These are the standard operating procedure that we come up. Besides that, also we need to have facilities to carry out this type of analysis. So in Malaysia, then we have INTROP already, I think, been recognized by CITES. They have been included in the CITES Directive or Laboratory that conduct wildlife forensic testing. The sample type actually is a plant species identification and wood traceability. So equipped with all these databases, the SOP, the management system, and also the facility, and then we start to actually to help actually the enforcement officer or wood industry for the application for timber forensic. These are, I think, some of the cases. Then today, I think I'm just sharing a few in dog enforcement. So this happened, I think, in 2017. Some illegal activities. Some log already moved to the sawmill. In the sawmill, some I think left in the forest reserve. By using, I think, our system, we'll be able to provide actually to track this illegal log into the original stump. This will provide direct forensic evidence to prove that the log has been illegally harvested from the forest reserve. These are one, I think, some already moved to the sawmill that is about nearly 300 kilometers from the forest reserve. Another one actually is involved in a single tree that now we are trying, to actually using the DNA this method to link up, actually the chainsaw that used to chop down this huge chenga tree. By using our the DNA database, we managed to, I think, trace back actually this chainsaw and the 3A have been used, actually to cut down, to chop down, to cut down the big tree. So another one actually is during this MCO during the pandemic time is I think this I think regarding the agarwood, some factory, then the enforcement officer will have to know actually where is the geographical origin of these all these agarwood. So by using our this reference database, then we managed to actually assign into their this geographical origin. Of course, all these assignment, you come up with the probability of assignment. It's not 100%. We need to conduct some statistical analysis to have some probability of assignment. So this one I think is for industry. This one I think one of the industry to EU. So it's under the crewing. In the timber trade name is the crewing. Crewing I think consists of all the diplocarpus. But under this crewing timber trade name, they have about 63 diplocarpus species throughout the world. Some is critically endangered. Some I think is least concern. Some is still abundant. So the industry want us to identify the species. Then it come out actually is Diplocarpus baudiera. It's not critically endangered. It's still quite common in Malaysia. So of course, I think when you talk about forensic, then we need to always stand by to testify in the court. This is, I think, one of the example. In 2017 is affidavit we need to prepare. Then we have to as this weakness actually we are not biased to it's just a weakness. We just a weakness. So I think in conclusion, so balancing conservation and utilization of tropical forest biodiversity is vital. So this I think is very important. I think innovation, actually is a very complicated. This I think issue have been, I think, since I joined in this forestry, I've been hearing all this how we're going to balance and utilize the tropical forest resources. But I think one of the very important messages is while we are enjoying our forest now for timber, medicine, rattans, bamboo, water, food, recreation, even though I think the oxygen, all these, so it's very important, is our responsibility also to preserve them for the benefit of our future generations. So with that, I think I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ratili.
Yeah.
So thank you for your insightful presentation. It is about DNA, generate DNA for geography to detect the location of the timbers. Okay, so I think I can make a short summary after we finish with all the presenter after this. So let's move to our second presenter, Dr. Mahmud Ibrahim. Mahmud from Nigeria. So Dr. Mahmud will talk about superhighway development, Triton's tropical forest conservation, and sustainable development goals in equatorial Africa. So a short bio about Dr. Mahmud. He is a senior environmental scientist at National Oil Spill Detection and Response, NOSTRA, in Abuja, Nigeria, since 2008. Specialized in remote sensing and GIS application for oil spill response and management in Nigeria. He recently completed a postdoctoral fellowship at James Cook University, Australia, focusing on geospatial technologies for assessing environmental impacts and biodiversity conservation. Dr. Mahmud, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so now without further ado, I pass the floor to you and it's yours.
Thank you, Fahim and Fatim. Yeah. So you can see my screen, right?
Yep.
So, and this is a very beautiful screen for me because it's also an opportunity to work with Professor Bill, where he hosted me for 2 years as a postdoctoral researcher, a fresh PhD student who was trying to find a pathway to sharpen his research skills and to look into some applications of some of the technical skills I have got. Also computer geospatial modeling, but then now looking into some applications with infrastructure, linear infrastructure development, and then trying to also create a pathway around not being an anti-development person, but a pro-smart development kind of person. So I work with Nostra, like you have said, and then my presentation is just going to look at a superhighway that was proposed by the Nigerian government that is trying to create an economic development. However, it was important to understand the positive or all the risks that are associated with this kind of development. So it's my pleasure to make this presentation, this forest issue topic, particularly, commemorating the International Day of Forest. And good morning, good afternoon to all, and maybe some places, good evening. So road infrastructure is something that is necessary but problematic. Why necessary? Because it improves living condition, but problematic because it causes an environmental damage. And generally, you will agree with me that roads facilitate economic development, but also leads to wilderness incursion. And about 90% of new roads are in developing nations, with many roads bisecting protected areas and intact forest. A bit of an overview of what at the continental scale, what road infrastructure projects looks like in Africa, where you have the Trans-African Highway, an idea that looks at an infrastructure across, and you can see the various categories of road infrastructure as published by NECA, and then the Nature Conservancy, where you can see a lot of roads. When you look at it from this map, they are quite interesting in trying to connect. But if you take a deeper dive, you'll see that some of them are actually bisecting protected areas or the biomes of in Africa that are very sensitive or very rare that needs to be protected. Also at a continental scale, you can see some logging roads where I think a field work has shown where we did some field work in Congo Basin, where you can see active logging roads, and then some within the context of the intact forest landscape, and you can see how the roads are actually having some temporality and changes as it affects the biodiversity and wildlife and sustainability in Africa. This is coming from a publication by Bill, where they try to assess some of the proposed road development. And clearly, we can see that some of the proposed development corridors, where about 33 of these corridors were looked at in segments, and knowing fully well that the backbone is roads or railroads and sometimes pipeline. However, in terms of the length, they vary across, and then they were assessed on the basis of and how these roads will actually create either positive or negative impact. So it's a publication that Bill looked at in 2015. And then part of the outcome of this research shows that you should ask some very deep questions around, are all development corridors desirable? And part of their findings clearly showed that, yes, indeed, you could find some that are promising, some will be marginal, while some are really inadvisable and creates a new course or a new direction to not to actually be that anti-development and scientist, but a pro-smart development, and by applying various forms of tools that actually can help in reshaping or rerouting or redirecting road infrastructure or linear infrastructure in the right direction around sustainability. Just to also make you see some of the intensely vulnerable environments that we have in Africa, where you can see the biomes. But within the context of our research, we were looking at, while trying to get a mix between biodiversity and wildlife, we identified in one of our case studies that will be presented in the course of this presentation, looking at the Cross River National Park, which provides a critical habitat for 18 species of primates, very rare in the world, and the Cross River gorilla, according to the red list of the IUCN, is labeled as a critically endangered species, and it needs to be protected through the proper conservation of forest. So some of the high stakes for Africa is that on one hand, you can see some of the rewards, while in terms of when you look at infrastructure, the part of the promises is that you have some very good tax and royalty revenue, major infrastructure investments that will talk around increased agricultural investment or growth or yield, and also mining mitigation, that would come around, some funding that can be used for offset and so on and so forth. But you might also want to look at risks, where you have environmental risks that come from mine sites, that come from direct and indirect infrastructure impact, encroachment into protected areas, then some societal risks that can be linked to corruption and disparity, and then also some that are actually linked to economic risks, where you have foreign land grabbing, and then you also have some very not interesting topics around corruption, and that white elephant projects and so on and so forth. So, and a couple of papers that both Bill and then when I joined his team will have been published from 2014 down to 2019. Some of the interesting narratives around why this research is the overall bigger goal to look at reducing the negative impact of road infrastructure in Africa, but particularly around forest. And the strategy came around where you try to look at identifying where proposed development corridor and roads are environmentally damaging, and then to come up with solutions as a pro-smart development to modify these road infrastructure to reduce environmental impacts towards achieving the SDG. But as a philosophy, where a philosophy that Bill drives, really talks about the global deforestation is actually is hugely contagious, and the moment you put in the first cut into wilderness, especially, it becomes a very dangerous and narrative where Bill will usually talk about it around cancer, and then where you want to apply the chemotherapy, and then eventually you realize that you have lost the entirety of what needs to originally be protected by avoiding the first cut. Some identified roads that threaten the Central African landscape, where you can see on the top left, I have an isolated Nigeria, which will be the core focus of this talk. However, if you look at the landscape level within equatorial Africa, and then more like and the larger Congo basin, you see a whole lot of infrastructure where I and Bill have, during a study, we have done a field study around these areas, and we have seen some of the impacts of linear infrastructure. And some of the things we find out is like in Cameroon, you have some very good forests, but they are empty because all the wildlife are gone. But then you can still find some proposed roads that are going on in some part of and the Congo Republic, or I mean, where and in some places we couldn't go due to war situation, or are really very risky. So the main topic is Cross River Superhighway, and then you can see that it's a state in the southeastern Nigeria, in the southern part of Nigeria, where we have a state government proposing 260 kilometers of roads that is meant to provide development, or bring development to the people of the state, or also connecting the south to the north, whereby there is a lot of socioeconomic advantages. However, a thorough scientific look was given to this idea. So, and what we found out was that this proposed superhighway was going to bisect biodiversity-rich forest, and it has a lot of baggage in terms of its high cost and debt burden. And then it also has some issues around the environmental impact that it's a whole lot going to, cascade into a lot of negative effects, but also you also have a vague economical benefits that have been promised in the conceptualization of this particular project. And so looking at the overall way of coming through this topic from a research point of view, and looking at it from a cost-benefit analysis, we look at a rerouting option for this road to make it a smart road, superhighway that is to be developed. And here we were able to provide two alternatives out of many possible ones, where we have looked at it and from an economic route, where it's going to be cheaper to construct and less borrowing will be involved, but also reduce environmental impacts and then a promising economic benefit. But we also looked at another approach where a new construction and alternative route will be made, which also has a lesser environmental impact and promising economic benefits, where one of the approach we used from a multi-criteria analysis is to look at blocking out all the entire forest or sensitive areas, but then looking at areas that have already been opened, and then looking at a brand new construction. If the government deems see that it wants a brand new construction, as opposed to the alternative and economic route that we proposed, and as a way to look at it. So looking at an unsuitable areas, and then the suitable areas, and then deciding whichever way to go as part of the option. So when you also identify problems, you should come up with possible solutions that governments can look at. In addition to that, just a bit of a analysis where we did the cost-benefit analysis is actually providing some insights around when you look at the originally proposed 260-kilometer length of road with a 20-kilometer width. That also looks a bit insane, and it's going to be a totally new paved road. We can see that the cost per kilometer is about in millions of dollars, and then we can see that overall the total cost, when you look at the proposed highway, the economic alternative route, and the new construction alternative route, we see that the proposed highway by the government far outweighs, doubles, or almost triples the cost of the alternatives that we have proposed. And I think this means that the roads can actually be constructed at a lesser cost, but then also ensuring that the state is not indebted over a long period of time, and that's the way to go. So, and so overall, one can conclude really that the alternatives we provided as an option for the state to consider balances sustainable infrastructure development with socio-economic benefits, but also, I mean, at the heart of this is biodiversity conservation. So just as a recap, reducing negative impacts of road infrastructure and has been earlier highlighted, was like our strategy was first of all to look at identifying where proposed road development corridors are likely to be damaging, but then also coming up with a solution-driven approach where we can modify this road infrastructure to reduce environmental damage. And if you look at it within the context of the SDGs, you see that we have an SDG that is actually looking at industry innovation and infrastructure in a very sustainable manner. That's SDG 9. SDG 9 is looking at sustainable infrastructure, and by so doing, linking and scientific research with environmental sustainability, or the SDGs, also is a good way to go in ensuring that you link research with developmental issues. So in conclusion, we can say that linear infrastructure poses massive environmental impact for African wildlife, ecosystem and protected areas, as well as socioeconomic risk when ill-planned, when they are not planned and properly. So, and to achieve sustainable development in Africa, we must build resilient infrastructure that promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovation through adopting technologies like cost-benefit analysis, GIS, remote sensing, and artificial intelligence, and approaches to do a deep dive into forest landscapes and to come up with how best to navigate in providing infrastructure. So, I mean, in a nutshell, we can see that the strong need for a proactive spatial planning agenda to build smart and resilient infrastructure is timely and justified in this era where we seek to ensure that we see that our forest is sustainably managed while we benefit currently and then for the future yet generations unborn that ought to also benefit from the forest and infrastructure or forest capital. So as part of my postdoc and under the tutelage of Bill, we've done a lot of research across various audiences where not just publication as is being promoted in unis or in the academia. You need to have a wider range of audiences where you can have some publications that are just looking at some press release. So ALAT has been that very good and platform where we have talked about mega highway that imperils the biological jewel of Nigeria. But then we've had also other publications where the alternative routes have been provided to the Nigerian government while it seeks to provide infrastructure for its people. We've looked at how road expansion and the fate of an African tropical forest have been dealt with from a research point of view. And then we've actually looked at infrastructure expansion and the fate of the Central African forest, and some other publications that have actually been either in research publication, in online journals, but as a book or book chapters, and so on and so forth. So I will thank you for listening to me this morning and then this afternoon over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud, for the presentation and informative info about the superhighway in Nigeria.
Thank you.
So I think now we can invite our third speaker. I think it's Prof. You ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Okay, just now we have Dr. Mahmoud talk about road infrastructure. It is necessary but problematic. Now we'll look into ghost road. Okay, that will be discussed by our third or last speaker for today's webinar. That is Prof. William Lawrence. Okay, I read a short bio of Prof. William. He is a distinguished research professor at James Cook University in Australia. He is an environmental scientist whose work span the tropical world and has written eight books and over 700 scientific and popular articles with 117 Scopus Index. He is currently Australia's top-ranked researcher in the fields of ecology, evolution, and environment. So the title of his talk today is Ghost Roads and the Destruction of Tropical Forests. So without further ado, Prof, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Fatim. So do you have the presentation there? And is somebody going to advance that for me? Can you put that up on the screen? I emailed it to you, or I sent it to you.
We can see your slide now, Prof.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
Okay, well, never mind then. Never mind. Okay, that's all great then. Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation for this really interesting forum. Big thanks to Maslin and to you, Fatin, and the rest of your team. It's a great, very timely thing to be doing. I also wanted to thank Dr. Lee and Mahmood for giving really interesting presentations, and Mahmood's talk was terrific, so I really enjoyed that. I'm going to sort of follow this theme of roads, and I hope people are getting the message that we're pretty worried about roads, and there's some pretty good reasons for that. So this is a little bit different from what Mahmood talked about, Dr. Mahmood talked about in his superhighways. What we're talking about here are ghost roads, and we call them ghost roads because basically they're illegal or they're informal, and you can't find them on any map. You can't find them on the global road databases. You can't find them on national maps. You can't find them on, for instance, Forestry Department maps, that type of thing. Now, I have been told a few times that I can be a little bit depressing in my talks, and of course, we're dealing with environmental crises here. But anyway, we're going to all sort of soldier through this and hopefully get through it all together. So obviously, as we know, tropical forests are just the epicenter of biodiversity on the planet. It doesn't matter if you're talking about birds or bats or trees or fungi, just about everything reaches a peak in species richness and also oftentimes in the incidence of endangered species in the tropics. So this is really where the grand storehouse of so much of our biological diversity, including many species that are ancient that have maybe vanished in other parts of the world. And also, unfortunately, tropical forests are being confronted by an unprecedented series of environmental threats. And this include things like habitat loss and fragmentation, climate change, hunting, pathogens, all things that we know about. But the thing that we really want to focus here is on roads because they're so important and so transformative in tropical forests. And we are living in the most dramatic and rapid period of road expansion in human history. We can go back to the entire history of humanity on the earth, and we see that the Romans were big road builders and other peoples have been building a lot of roads, but that's nothing compared to what we're doing right now. Current estimates suggest that we're going to have something like 25 million kilometers of new paved roads, and that's just paved roads, not the unpaved roads, but 25,000 kilometers of paved roads by the middle part of this century, which is enough to go around the world more than 600 times. We are building roads everywhere. And as Mahmood mentioned, oftentimes national parks, protected areas, areas of high environmental values, all kinds of areas are being opened up like a flayed fish by many new roads. Now, when we talk about roads, well, what does a road do? Well, obviously, one of the things it does is it allows people to move into the forest much more readily. And so we get a few different kinds of things that happen with roads. We get some direct effects like habitat loss. So a bulldozer has been moving around in here, and we can see we have a clearing of a few dozen meters in width. This is a gold mining road in Panama, by the way. So we lose some habitat. That's one of the environmental effects. Another one is our edge effects, and they're called edge effects because they're environmental changes, ecological changes, and biophysical changes that are associated with the very abrupt and artificial edges of roads or habitat fragments when humans get involved. So you can see here, this is in the central Amazon. The forest here is dense, it's dark, it has very little wind, it has very high humidity, very specialized microclimatic conditions. Out here in the road, it's harsh, it's bright, it's dark, the temperature fluctuates a lot, it can get very hot. The conditions are just completely different. And when you juxtapose, when you put those two kinds of environments together, like you do when you build a road through a forest, you get a whole bunch of different edge effects, which are these ecological changes associated with those abrupt and artificial boundaries. So here, this would be the road right here. And this is moving into the forest up to 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters. And then here's the different edge effects here. You can see they're really diverse. I mean, there's all kinds of things. There's changes in forest dynamics. There's changes in species composition. There's big increases in invasive species. There's just a whole range, changes in just all kinds of changes in the dynamics and composition of the vegetation. And for some sensitive species, that can be an important cause of their decline. Roadkill is another important cause. We know that there are certain kinds of species, whether they bask on roads or they tend to be slow moving or they tend to freeze when a car comes along, whatever. There's a variety of these different kinds of species that can be very vulnerable to roads. And then we get into so-called indirect effects, and these are things that don't happen directly as a consequence of the road building, but happen later and happen consequent to that. And of course, a really big one is the incursions of hunters. And Mahmoud mentioned the fact that there were places in areas like Cameroon where you would have forests that are almost devoid of wildlife. Pretty much all the wildlife has been shot out, hunted out of these areas. So in many parts of the world, we're seeing a big increase in the roads, which is allowing more hunters to penetrate into forests. And then another thing that's happening is that the hunting technologies are much more lethal now than they would have been in the past. So instead of having poison darts and arrows and spears, hunters now are equipped with automatic rifles like AK-47s. And and they also use poison like cyanide and some of the poisons that come from local plant species for their darts. And also there can be a lot of these snares, these wire and cable snares in protected areas. You can see here in one national park in Cambodia, they got well over 100,000 snares that they removed over a period of a few years. And one of the things that we're starting to see now with camera traps is animals walking around the forest that have been maimed by these snares. They're not always killed. Some of them might have a leg cut off, they might have an arm cut off. The elephants will have their trunk cut off. Other animals are just very grievously wounded, but they're not actually killed. So there's a lot of kind of, alarming things happening. Then there's deforestation, of course. So people are moving into the forest, they're logging, they're fragmenting the forest, they're chopping down the trees. And that leads to forest destruction and also carbon emissions. And we know that the destruction and degradation of tropical forests right now is responsible for about 15% of the global carbon emissions that we're producing. That is actually a lot. That's more than the entire global transportation sector. So everything in the planet that's motorized, every car, truck, boat, plane, everything, that's the transportation sector. And the tropical forest destruction is producing more carbon emissions than all that put together. So now we want to talk about ghost roads, which is really the theme of this talk. So what are ghost roads? I'm pleased and relieved to tell you that we've actually got a paper led by one of my PhD students that is in press now in Nature. It was an absolute bear to get it accepted, but we finally got it in there. And it talks about these so-called ghost roads that don't occur on maps. They're illegal, they're unofficial, they're not supposed to be there, yet they are. So again, we see here, the ghost roads are not on major road databases. So some examples of this would be something called OpenStreetMap and something called the Global Roads Inventory Project, so OSM and GRIP, as well as official government maps. You just don't find these roads on them. They're illegal or informal, as we said, they're rarely paved. And there's a lot of them out there. If we look at different parts of the world, for instance, the Brazilian Amazon, we see we have 260% more ghost roads than we have legal roads. And it just goes on and on, like the Solomon Islands. You can see Cameroon, 3.3, Pan-Amazonia, and Sarawak, 9.9. So you basically got almost 10 times as many illegal roads in a place like Sarawak than you do have legal roads. So it's a really big and serious problem. Here you can see the study area for this investigation we did in Nature. This work, we had 210 volunteers working on this that were actually mapping all the roads by hand, by eye, off of computer screens, using a technique that we developed. And what you can see here is that it was very slow and difficult to collect these data. We covered about 1.4 million hectares altogether, as you can see here. So these are areas that have got high road density, as you can see in the red here. So basically Sumatra, Borneo, and the island of New Guinea. So when we compare the road that's found on the roads that are found on the major databases, as we mentioned, this is like OpenStreetMap, which would be here, and the Global Roads Inventory Project, which would be here. So here's what GRIP says in terms of how many roads there's going to be in this particular study landscape that we're looking at that's right there in northern Borneo. That's what GRIP says. Here's what OSM says, OpenStreetMap. They says there's the roads. Here's what we found when we actually went in detail and mapped everything. I think you begin to see why it is that we're very worried about these roads and why it is that we need to be much more aggressive and ambitious in dealing with them. So here's another thing. People oftentimes use something called the human footprint to try to map the extent of human activities in different parts of the world. And this is a very useful index, but one of the key things that it includes as building the index is road density, or roads and infrastructure. Well, if we're drastically underestimating infrastructure, what use is the human footprint going to be? So here's an area in eastern Borneo, and you can see here, this is a study in 2020 that used the older data that was missing a lot of roads. And here's our study, the same study area, and you can see here how much worse things really are when you know really where the roads actually are. And you don't get an accurate picture at all if you don't understand all these ghost roads. So we cannot ignore ghost roads. We're not going to be able to manage them until we know where they are and how fast they're spreading. Currently, the major databases just miss most of the ghost roads. And the ghost roads are really important for two key reasons. One is, yes, of course, they're absolutely critical in terms of their environmental impacts around roads. But also another thing is that, pardon me, I'm sorry, they promote various kind of illegal and illicit activities that people do that defraud governments of critical revenues. So this could be illegal logging. In Indonesia, for instance, there's $3 to $4 billion of illegal logging happening every year. There's all kinds of illegal drug production, illegal poaching, illegal mining activity. There's just a whole range of things that can happen and do happen in areas with a lot of illegal roads, and that are defrauding the governments of the royalties and the taxation that they very much need for building schools and running the government and doing all the things that they do. So we cannot ignore these ghost roads. So we just did a little study, as I mentioned. We used about 7,000 person hours to map the roads, and we got about 1.4 million hectares, which is just a tiny little fragment of the world. What if we wanted to scale this up and map not just a little area, but a great big area, like the whole planet, all the Earth's land surface? And if we want to do that at the same intensity that we did, we would need about 640,000 person hours, or about 73 years for one person. But the problem is this: we can't wait 73 years for one person to map all the roads, because by the time that happens, there are going to be a whole bunch of new roads. And in fact, there's new roads going in all the time. We desperately need to have these roads done every year, at a minimum every year, to map all the roads on the planet. So how can we do that? Well, people are talking a lot these days about artificial intelligence and machine learning and all that. So we decided to try to look at this as a strategy of road mapping. And I had a master's degree student who was very good, who led this work or helped to lead this work. And we found some interesting results. So this is stuff that, a lot of this was all about the technical development of these methods, but the bottom line is they are so fast. Once you finally develop the models, they are amazingly fast. You can just reanalyze a whole area just with a snap of your fingers. So what we found here, this is a paper that was just published in the journal Remote Sensing. We found that our best models were accounting for about 81% of the roads. That's pretty good, we think. Still got a ways to go. Absolutely not there yet. And there's still some important missing bits. But the bottom line is, it's moving us in the right direction of where we need to be going. And I think that that's quite promising to see that happening. So I hope I haven't been terribly depressing. I really like to end with a note of hope there, because In fact, we are moving ahead pretty rapidly with some of the key technical elements. And I think we're also very keen to talk to people about ghost roads, and so that they understand how tremendously important, how terribly important they really are in terms of environmental and economic sustainability. So I thank you all very much for your attention, and happy to chat if there's any questions.
Thank you, Prof. Bill, for your interesting presentation on the ghost road. Okay, for the meantime, I think before I try to make a summary from the presenters and open for Q&A, participant, you can feel free to type your question in the Q&A box, and we will address as many as we can after this. Okay, just write your question in the chat box. Okay, just a short summary from Dr. Lee presentation just now. Okay, tropical forests are among the most biodiverse ecosystem on Earth, harboring a vast array of plant species. And Dr. Lee's focus on Malaysian forests. So, however, this biodiverse ecosystem also subject to intense pressure from human activities such as logging. Okay, finding a middle ground or equilibrium between protecting the ecological integrity and biodiversity of tropical forests. That is conservation on what Dr. Lee and the team focus is generate the DNA for certain species and conservation and management guideline based on life history approach. And also from that, from the DNA establishment, they know the geographical origin of the timbers. Okay, and utilizing their resources in a sustainable manner is necessary to balance between conservation and utilization. In short, managing tropical forests in a way that ensure the preservation and sustainable use of their biological diversity, while also meeting human needs through legal logging and development objective is still a challenge and our responsibility. So that is from Dr. Lee and from Dr. Mahmood, our second speakers. Okay, some point from Dr. Mahmood is the impact of superhighway development, challenges to forest conservation, relevance of SDG in guiding sustainable development initiative and addressing the socio-economic and environmental challenges associated with superhighway development. Okay, also to take note the integrated planning and landscape approach. And yeah, that is from Dr. Mahmood. And Dr. Mahmood, we have actually we have same situation, but in Malaysia we have Central Forest Pine to connect the three critical landscape in Peninsular Malaysia to conserve biodiversity ecosystem services. It starts in 2005. That is in Malaysia, Central Forest Pine or CFS. Okay, and short summary from Prof. Lawrence. Okay, we can see the impact of ghost road on tropical forests, require proactive measures such as road planning and design that can minimize ecological disturbance, effective enforcement of land use, restoration of degraded landscape, and sustainable land management. Okay, I can see the innovation in hunting in your slide, Prof.
Okay.
By mitigating the negative effect of road infrastructure on forest ecosystem, conservation efforts can help preserve the ecological integrity and biodiversity of tropical forests for future generations. So that is the summary of our three panelists from this webinar today. Okay, okay, we're still waiting for question from the participant, but for the meantime, I will start the discussion. A general question, and I open to whether Prof. Bill, Dr. Lee, or Dr. Mahmood. So we understand that forest innovation and sustainability could promote ecological balance, mitigate climate change, and support diverse life forms. And we nowadays and our future generation on this earth depend on forests for our lives. So my question is, how can innovation in forestry contribute to balancing environmental conservation, maybe with economic development and social equity, ultimately fostering a more sustainable and resilient future for forests and the communities relying on them. So, on the innovation.
I think that's a question for Dr. Lee, or at least that's right up his alley. It's like
So I think when you talk about this sustainable utilization of these forest resources, when you talk about these forest resources in terms of these wood, I mean the timber. One of the things I think very important actually is to avoid, actually utilize the tree species from the natural forest. In order to do that, then we need to encourage these forest plantation, so that I think the wood supply, will be, I think, not relying from the natural forest. But in order to do that, then we must have, these good material for the forest plantation. They mean improve planting material, fast growing. Then also I think that produce quality wood. Traditionally, I think this one can be achieved, using these conventional, breeding. But we all know that I think trees have these long lifespan. Conventional breeding of these tree species, might take few generations. So the innovation now, I think, is we call it molecular breeding. Molecular breeding also, I think, is a long history, from all these quantitative trait loci. Now, with the advancement, of these what they call the genomics technology, then we can, I think, emphasis, on all these what they call it, I think, the genome-wide association study. This one, I think, have been, I think, been carried out, in the agriculture crops. But in the forestry tree species, I think it's still relatively new. Besides, I think the genome, wide association study, another aspect is we need to take, the advancement of all these, the AI, artificial intelligence. Combining, of these, what they call that, the advancement of this genomic technology plus, the artificial intelligence. Then we can come up with what we call it, actually is a genome scanning method that we can use it, actually to come up with some molecular breeding. You can shorten the time. Actually, here, actually, we are trying, I think, to come up with a study that actually utilize all these deep learning or machine learning technique, actually, to associate these genetic variation, associate genetic variation with all these the quantitative trait of a tree species. It means they are these physiological trait. Like, for example, you try to associate a marker, the DNA marker, that associated with their growth performance. So this one, I believe that this type of innovation, would have a full, these are good potential, actually to shorten, or the time of breeding, or actually to identify, actually good planting material that can be used, for forest plantation. So I think one of the, destruction of the forest actually is harvesting of these the timber. This is, I think, one of the major, especially I think in the tropical area. So I think these are only the solution. If let's say, you can find the alternative. It means wood sources, is from a plantation. I think this is one of the innovation I can think of. Okay, thank you. I think the others.
That is more on the biogenetic innovation, I think.
Yeah.
And then as you mentioned, that we encourage forest plantation, and then maybe there is some issues related on that, on maybe the opening of the area for road. Okay, I think that is the issue that come back and forth.
Right.
Okay. So I think we have a question from the floor.
Fatim, did you see there's 3 questions that are online in the Q&A?
Yeah.
Oh, you saw those? You saw those questions?
Yep. So
Are we gonna answer those?
yep. I will read the question from the floor. This from the Muhammad Shahid Shamsuddin. So he want to ask as any role of government in forest diversity issue. The role of government, any government in forest diversity issue?
I'll have a quick go at that. Look, governments play all kinds of roles in forest issues. I mean, through land use planning, through issues around economic development, through spatial issues of development in terms of how they go about their land use development. Unfortunately, the role of government is not nearly probably as effective as it could be in many situations because we see various kinds of breakdowns in the work not being done in some places and countries, and just a variety of complicating factors that can distort things. But governments can engage in forest diversity in a lot of ways. The big question is, are they able to do that in an effective way that sustainably promotes development? And that's the real challenge, not just for Malaysia, but for countries all around the world. OECD countries, developing countries, everybody is struggling with the same thing. Although, of course, the developing countries have more need for economic development, urgent economic development. But anyway, yeah, that's just a quick reply to that. I would say absolutely governments are involved, just not always as well as we would like.
Dr. Lee, you have any opinion on that in Malaysian practice?
For Malaysia, normally I can see the gaps. So when you talk about conservation, normally as a researcher, I think this is a challenge. We need to generate all these the basic information. Then the next challenge is once we have all these basic information, how are we going to translate into the guideline? It can be used. Then the last challenge is once you have a guideline, how are we going to convince for the implementation? It means how are we going to disseminate, actually to the stakeholders for the implementation. So I can foresee, I think, in order, I think, to have all these, we need to overcome these 3 gaps. So I think we still, I think, need to work very hard, especially I think the gaps from the guideline, towards the implementation. So I think in terms of this, the role of government, I think in Malaysia, I think the government play a very big role. Like all these, we have all these national forestry policy, then all various policy, actually to ensure that actually manage our forest in a sustainable manner for our future generations. So no matter how, I think we still have a gap, in order actually to achieve the goals. It's a challenging gap in order to fulfill the dream. I've seen, I think, one of the question from Tan Sri Saleh. I think of sustainable tropical forest management is only a dream. Yeah, do the panelists agree? As a researcher, I not agree actually. If they say, when you conduct research, with proper, I think, implementation, I think this is not a dream. As a researcher, per se. Tan Sri, are you around? I'm Lee Tan Sri. Oh, Tan Sri, no. Okay.
Yeah, I think Tan Sri is not able to.
No. Yes. What is it?
Okay. Is it Tan Sri Saleh?
Tan Sri Saleh.
I know you got several Tan Sris here. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry.
You got Tan Sri Saleh, I think.
Yeah, Tan Sri Saleh asking question about the dream of sustainable tropical forest management.
Could I say something about that?
Yeah, sure, Prof.
Fatim? Well, one thing that I think is a challenge for having one big question is when you say sustainable management, you know, the first thing people say, well, what does that really mean? But to me, it would mean, you know, you've got a relatively intact forest. It's not shrinking over time. The forest is not being heavily exploited. It's maintaining most of its important ecological functions, that, you know, that type of thing. But one of the things that really is a problem, I think, for tropical forests is that the rate of marketable wood production, and I think someone like Dr. Lee's going to know this very well, but the rate of marketable wood production in a tropical forest is not very high. It might be 1 or 2 cubic meters per year. In a plantation, which would be maybe softwood species or some hardwoods, you could get 10 times that much, maybe even 15 times that much. So you get a lot more wood production. It's not the beautiful tropical timbers, you know, the valuable timbers, but you can still produce a lot more wood with a plantation than you can in a tropical forest. So that automatically creates a real problem for sustainable management. And that if you know, I mean, I think there's going to be a situation where you'll often have several cycles of logging, and then the land will often get cleared. This is happening all through the world in Southeast Asia. So, you know, I think there's a real challenge for sustainable tropical forest management. Of course, I also think that the kind of things that Dr. Lee and his colleagues are doing are really extremely valuable, and trying to set up the sort of scientific and management and enforcement infrastructure around forest exploitation. But I think we've got a ways to go. We've got some challenges that we're facing before we can really sustainably manage forests, which is probably one of the reasons why we're seeing them shrinking so rapidly right now.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Mahmoud, you have,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah. So more like I'll personally, I mean, talking from somebody who has actually really worked with government or working with government, but then also doing research. And so, I mean, you want to say, yeah, the government has its own oversight around providing the business enabling environment for any kind of for any kind of businesses that are linked to forest and exploitation, forest management, its conservation, and so on and so forth. Because, say for instance, in Africa, you still have, I mean, most of the forests are still within the purview of the government. The policies are being developed by the government. The regulation is being developed by the government. The implementation in terms of enforcement is still also resting on the hands of the government. So the government really have a very strong and active role in playing around that. However, right now, government needs to ensure that and you know, the business enabling environment, which includes both land, forest, water, all needs to be well mainstreamed in the proper context, such that there is a kind of organized way of exploiting or utilizing the resources in a sustainable context, where this sustainability, I mean, topic, or this sustainability clause is actually well defined, just like Bill alluded to. And you might also want to look at the aspect where to say corruption practice causing illegal logging, illegal roads, almost everything illegal. Yeah, you will find that, say, for instance, in Africa, where you have a lot of the Chinese incursion. The Chinese incursion is going really deep, because this is something, I am saying this out of a field work. So it's more like something that has been seen, where you have large-scale mining, you have large-scale road development, going into the forest unknown. And then when you ask questions, these people have, one way or the other, they have their permits through the government. So government itself of this corruption, but whereas also, investors, particularly from Chinese and any other part of the world, because you still find other people still playing in this. Now, be ethical, ethics, be ethical around the idea around when you talk about sustainability, there is a sincerity of purpose around making sure that while you want business to be, it should be business as usual. It should be business that is governed or anchored with ethics of, utilization for the current and the future purposes. So yeah, this is a bit of what it is. But yeah, I agree with Dr. Lee that when you want to talk about you want to talk about whether it is a dream or not, if things are well implemented, you could have some sense of sustainability, or it's not just a dream, but sustainable forest management is not just a dream, but it can be implemented. However, you might have variation, I mean, across the world in terms of how it is being implemented and the success rate that you have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mahmood. So I think you have answered the question from one of our participants. The question is about to what extent is corruption practice causing the illegal logging of tropical forests? So maybe if Prof or Dr. Lee want to add more on the answer to discuss more on that? No?
Yeah, Mahmood got it. Mahmood nailed it.
Okay, so I think now it's already 4:45. I think that is actually I have one question or one question for the panelists. Maybe since we almost out of time, so maybe in 1 minute, okay, what is the main message that you would like to audience to take away from this webinar today on the issues of tropical forests? First, Dr. Lee.
I think like just now during my presentation, so I think it's very important that for the tropical country, we have a forest. Then we can utilize it. Then at the same time, we will ensure, that our forest can be used by our future generation. So this one, I think we go back to the balancing. So now the key issue actually is how big actually is enough. Then I go back to my first, actually the approach that I think is very important. Actually, the research activities, actually we should, I think, continue. Actually to come out with some magic number. What is the optimum population size? Actually, when you talk about this conservation, so you allow, I think certain partner that can be utilized, actually for the present generation, and also, we have captured some, that could be enough, or maybe you'll be like can be sustained for our future generation. So I go back to the question, actually, what is a magic number? I'm trying to find this answer over the 20 years as a researcher. Now I still trying. I always call it as a magic number. Magic number, optimum population size. When you talk about, we want to balancing utilization and conservation of forest resources. So I hope all those young researchers, they can take up the challenge. We come up with all these magic number. I think in animal field, yes, you heard about all these 50, 500 rules, all these for animal, but for plant, I think this is a challenge. Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee. That is a challenge to our young researchers to find the magic numbers. Okay, Dr. Mahmood, 1 minute take-home message.
Oh yeah. Well, the message is as a crusader of pro-smart development.
Oops, we are having, I think, Dr. Mahmood.
Rose, yeah.
Loss of connection from us here. Okay, while waiting, maybe Prof. Bill, can you please make a summary?
Sure, very quickly. We are living in the most dramatic era of road expansion in human history by far. Many of the roads that are being constructed today are illegal, unofficial, informal. They're not on any maps. They're not being produced by governments or even by corporations in many cases. There can be a whole range of different land users and others that are creating and bulldozing forests all over. I think that the rapid expansion of infrastructure and all the change that it's provoking is actually more important than climate change. I think it's more important than overexploitation. I think it's probably more important than the massive pathogens that we're seeing moving all over the planet and in many types of forest disruption. The reason I'm saying such a bold statement like that is because the roads, as they open up all these areas, are actually causing all those things to happen. They're causing climate change because of all the carbon emissions and forest destruction. They're causing overexploitation through hunting and other things happening with wildlife. They're bringing pathogens into these areas. They're promoting forest disruption. So look, we've got to talk about the roads. We need to get on top of the roads. Nations are being ripped off left, right, and center from critical economic resources because these lands, the lands that are in their forest estates, are being exploited illegally. And the resources are being stolen, and it's not fair to the government of Malaysia. It's not fair to the people of Malaysia and into other developing countries for this kind of thing to happen. So I'd put that as a real priority.
Thank you, Prof. Bill. Dr. Mahmud, we lost you for some seconds. So you want to...
Yeah, so it's the network. Well, right. Well, I was just saying that while you want to talk about as a promoter of smart infrastructure development, spatial planning has to be at the forefront of this, and newer technologies are also still being brought into this, where you have AI, you have the semantics of the utilization of these tools, and this has to be at the front burner, whether at the planning stage of infrastructure, at the implementation stage of infrastructure, and at the post management of this infrastructure. And I mean, proper context of spatial planning has to be brought in this, such that it's a lot integrated, it's not in isolation. And with this, you will always have a balanced view or a wider perspective around the need and the management of infrastructure in a proper context. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. So now I will make a short conclusion for this today webinar. Okay, overall discussion underscore the importance of holistic and integrated approach to forest management to counter the forestry issues that consider the complex interaction between environmental, social, and academic factors by leveraging innovation such presented by Dr. Lee on maybe on genome, deep learning, biogenetic innovation, and by Prof. Bill on AI in detecting the ghost road, and Dr. Mahmud maybe the application of geographic information system for decision making in superhighway development. Okay, collaboration and sustainable practice, we can work towards safeguarding the forest ecosystem, promoting biodiversity conservation, and ensuring the well-being of both people and the planet for future generations. So before we end, I would like to express sincere gratitude to all of our three speakers, Dr. Lee, Dr. Mahmud, and Prof. Bill, and all of you, the participants joining us today. Your participation and engagement are essential in driving the conversation and preserving our vital forest ecosystem for a better world. Many thanks again to all. And back to you, MC. Fatin.
Okay, thank you so much, Associate Professor Dr. Norizah Kamarudin. I found it very insightful and interesting, and I truly hope the participants enjoy it too. Huge thanks to all speakers for joining us and for your incredible support of this webinar. To the participants, thank you very much for attending this webinar for all over the world, making this program a success. I would like to remind the audience that this webinar is a pre-conference event of the International Conference on Tropical Sciences, TropSc2024. We have more pre-conference webinars coming soon, so please join us next time. And if you would like to watch the recording of today's session, you can check out our YouTube channel. We will upload the video soon. That's all from us today. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Lee.